Well, good evening. Today is Tuesday night, September. I can't remember, but about 8 maybe, wasn't. I think it's probably the 8th. And God is with us. We met a new couple that moved in the neighborhood the other, that was last night maybe we were. And it was good. They're believers and it was fun to meet them. We got a good number of believers in the neighborhood in which we live in. It's very good, very good. We are in Romans, picking it up, and we had to stop because of time last time, and we stopped right in the middle of something, and I got to go back there and smooth that over, and to get us into that mood again. Sometimes it's hard to pick up where you left off like that. Now, where we are, just to get that's why it's good to watch these in sequence, or at least go back over them, because they're always, all of these are still on Facebook, and I'll leave them there. And I have them preserved as well, elsewhere. But we're in Romans 6, paragraph 3. Paragraph 3 is verses 15 through 23. And we are in the second sentence of that paragraph. We're going by sentences. And that second sentences has verse 16, 17, 18, and 19a. Just the first half of verse 19, and the sentence ends there. So that's where we are. This is verse 16, and remember we covered this. Don't you know that you are slaves to whomever it is you present yourselves as slaves, which will result in your obedience to them, whoever it is you obey, whether to sin in death or whether obedience ending up in righteousness there. There's an interesting phraseology there, whether sin resulting in death or obedience resulting in righteousness. So back over here to my board over here, I've got a little different chair in here, so it doesn't have wheels on, and it doesn't turn, so I gotta make it turn. And this may be the last time I use it, although it's better height. The old age of sin and death over here, whether sin, which results in death, whether we stay over here, or whether after we've been delivered out of there and transferred in the kingdom of His Son, whether it's obedience, staying here under hearing under the word of God, staying there in obedience, which will end up in righteousness, is what this is saying. Okay, and so Paul is actually saying there's a dilemma here. Now we got to always remember that we're dealing with this. Chapter 6 is dealing with how God views the situation, how God is looking at things. Okay, Paul is comparing death to the realm of sin, and resurrection to new life in Christ and obedience on that side as well. You'll remember he's picking up a thought out of verse 12 as well. And we talking about slaves. You will remember we dealt quite a bit with slaves the last time and what it meant. So we're not going to fuss with that again. Now what we're doing here is this is not talking about whether sin into death here is not talking about occasional sins going on. That's not what it's talking about. It's talking about an alliance with sin. And what is that alliance with sin? Nothing more than right back over here again in the realm of sin and death. When we were born into this alliance with sin. That's what this is talking about here. Whether with an alliance with sin or into death or obedience over here that ends up in eternal life. John 8:34 says, everyone who sins is a slave to sin. Everyone that's over here is a slave to sin. Not talking about individual acts. But the word for in John 8:34 is the word poieo, which means to ratify. It means to sign your name to. It means to agree with in that sense. It's not a habitual practicing of sin. It is signing one's name to it. When you're over here, you've signed your name to it. in that regard there. So it's a ratification of sin. Now, some assumptions. I don't know if we got this far. I don't think so. I don't think we got this far. Now, Paul sees a person as a creature. Creature. When we use the word creature in this respect, always remember, because we will use it. It's how you talk about this stuff. When you use the word creature here as a person, you're simply saying that person's created. That's really what that means. Every creature is created. That's where you get the word creature as a creation and whatnot. So Paul sees a person as a creature, i.e. created by God and in the image of God, in the likeness of God. That means then that there is an intrinsic, that means it's part of us, it's inner bound within us, and an inherent, we inherit that right in here, fixed relationship between the creator and creation, which is humanity. Creation is humanity. So there's a fixed relationship between creator and what he created, i.e. humanity. God is eternally creator. He's not the created. And Jesus is not the created either, by the way. God is eternally creator. That doesn't change. It can't change. If it would change, he would cease to be God, and nothing else would ever, everything would cease to exist. Humanity is forever the createe. He's that which is created. God is the creator. Humanity is the createe. And I'm going through this for a reason here. So that establishes a relationship. God is creator, humanity is created, and that doesn't change. Okay? That's what we're talking about, all right? That can't change. Humanity doesn't become creator. Humanity does not become creator. God is always created. Humanity is always a created. Okay? And humanity must be in that position. God is the giver. Humanity is the receiver. If we don't receive from God, we can't exist. If God doesn't give to us, we can't exist. Now that relationship never changes. Never changes. It is always that way. The problem with humanity is it doesn't like that. And it tries to rise up above that. And that's the tension that is in all this. So, here's the point. Humanity is not, therefore, free. In the sense that humanity can be Lord of his or her own life or world. Humanity is not the Lord of his or her own life or the world or of anything else. To think like that is an illusion. It's not there. You can reach out and grab it, but there's nothing really to grab. It's a false narrative. Adam and Eve fell because they attempted to reach beyond, to reach past, and beyond their createdness. Now follow with me, if you can, with this. Their createdness. There is a relationship between creator and created. The creator is the creator. The created is the created. It's never the creator. And humanity can never rise above that. I'm hearing something clicking around down in here. Do you hear that? Okay. Maybe it's my foot over here. I'm sorry. So there's that position that doesn't change. And humanity's problem is that it tries to rise above that. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit here. Adam and Eve fell, as I said, because they attempted to reach out past and beyond, establish themselves as being above obedience. The text here says, over here, you are slaves to whomever it is you present yourselves as slave, resulting in your obedience to whoever it is you are that you obey. Whether sin into death or whether obedience. Here's what we're talking about. Whether obedience into the righteousness. Obedience is what we're fussing with here. So they established, Adam and Eve tried to establish themselves because of Satan's temptation there and Eve's being deceived, themselves as above being in obedience to the Creator. Well, that rule and that law is for them, not for me. I can go do this. The rest of the people can't, but I can because I made the rule. Or something. That's it. That humanity tried to rise above. We're better than that. We're the king's kids, is a way to say with it. We're created for greater things than that. all that nonsense that comes into play. It sounds spiritual. They use biblical verses to do it, and it sounds good, and it gets people jacked up. But that it's wrong. It's the wrong way. It is the wrong way. So, to be on a neutral ground, there are those who try to be on this neutral ground so that they can be exempt from the God's commandment in the garden, don't do this. But there is no neutral ground, and in our battles that we have today in this country, there are those who a lot of Christians try to be on the neutral ground. I'm just not gonna say. I'm just not gonna take sides. I'm for love, 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 love. We're gonna let it sit like that. No. To try to be on neutral ground is simply a way of trying to get around a responsibility of what must be done. And I'm working on a presentation on Bonhoeffer and Sophie, what was her name? The last name, Schroll, and some other ones relative to German occupation in Bonhoeffer too, and German occupation in World War II and how they stood against it. All right, and that's a very critical thing. We got storms going through here, and we may lose a light. And if we do, we're just going to let it go and keep on going. All right. So we just have to put up with that. Now the question we want to fuss with here is, I've got some stuff I want to share with you on the human condition. When we're talking about sin and temptation, as we're talking about now, the question comes out: what is it really? What is it? What is it and what is it not? And from where does such temptation come? Is a thing that it's always asked. Where does that come from? What is the source of it? And that's been a source of discussion for a long time, actually. James tells us that true temptation to sin comes from our own personal latent desires, active or latent within us. And this it comes from the inside and not the outside. Some people have a difficult time catching that, but the temptation to sin does not come from the outside. It comes from the inside of us. The act of temptation of Satan to Jesus in and of itself is a dead situation. And when we are tempted to sin, in and of itself, it is a dead situation there. It's not alive. The situation is not alive. What brings it to life is the desire that is latent on the inside, okay? Now, we see that in James 1, by the way, when it talks about the many-colored daily situation into which each of us bump all the time, all day long, we bump into these things. The situation we bump into is not alive. Now here's the issue. It's not alive. It's a temporal clause. It's a circumstantial clause. When Satan came to Jesus, he tempted him with this, that, and the other. They were circumstantial clauses. They were temporal situations that were trying to interrupt the life of Jesus, if you will. That's how it comes. So a situation into which we bump in and of itself is dead. It has no control, no power over you. Absolutely none. Unless there's something on the inside of me or you that reacts to it and brings that thing alive. And that's where temptation to sin comes from, is from that latent desire on the inside. James says that we are tempted to sin, each of us on our own personal idios desire, when we are enticed and led away. The picture of that is when we used to go fishing up north in Canada. We just had to go out. When we first would get in there and set up camp, we'd go to a place we named Pike Lake. That wasn't the name of it, but we catch so many pike up there that we named it that. Nobody went in there, but it was way out on a road you could barely get down. And then you had to know that the lake was there and somehow get that car. There was a little lane off that, back it in there, unload the boat, and walk back a ways, and then put the boat in the lake, put the motor on and all of that. I remember one morning, we got there early in a cloud, the mist all over the lake, and Bruno, my Uncle Bruno, was was running the motor, and we pushed that boat out, you know, and as we were floating on out there, Bruno's starting the motor. He's cranking it up, and the thing started, and he was so wrapped up into starting that motor that he didn't see the moose right behind him. It was neck deep in the water. And when Bruno looked up and turned around, that moose was looking right straight at Bruno. It was really funny. So he kicked it in gear and off we went. But we used to go there fishing. There were big rocks submerged under there and logs. We get those lures out there and flip that out there and drop it and troll. Real slow we troll. And pretty soon we like to get that lure right on the bottom of that rock a little ways away, or the log, and that pike is laying there all nice and comfortable, see, until he's good. But see, the pikes, they have a voracious appetite. They can't control themselves. They have to eat all the time. So when that lure comes by, it's a dead lure. The situation is dead. It's nothing alive in it. It's dead, 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 dead. You understand? But when that lure comes by the snoot of that fish and it catches it, it can't help itself. Man, zap! Out from underneath that rock it comes and grabs that sucker, and boom, the race is on. We bring that rascal right on into the boat. That's the process of sin. It comes from the inside. That fish didn't have to move. The lure was dead, but because of that desire on the inside to eat everything in sight, it had to grab that. That's the situation. That's called the stimuli. It comes forth. Comes that the stimuli brings something to life that's been latent on the inside. But in Jesus, there was nothing in him that reacted to that. There was nothing in him that would react to any emotive thing or any stimuli, not even beating him, not even crucifying him, not even all the other stuff. There is nothing that could get a rise out of him. There was none of that on the inside. There was no sin nature on the inside. Now, the question has surfaced then, regardless to this, in regard to this, did Adam have a sin nature? And the answer to that is no. Not prior to sin entering in the world through Adam. And then the next question is, then, what's the difference between Jesus and Adam? Why did Adam sin and Jesus not sin? And that's a decent question too. We'll try to fuss with that here. The initial answer is Jesus is uncreated. He took the form and likeness of humanity. Adam is created and is inherently the creature. Remember that difference between created and creature. He is of a different substance than the created, but leaves another subordinate questions too. We'll get as we work our way through here. So what we want to do is dig around into the predicament of humanity back there in its pre-fallen state, if we can, for just a few minutes here. In humanity, there are several contradistinctions. Now, my sources for all this, I've been reading these guys for a long time, all the way back into grad school. And Reinhold Niebuhr is a good source for this, and I like some of M.O. Brunner's stuff on humanity, and Dietrich Bonhoeffer is very good in dealing with this. And a professor I had at Spring Arbor University, Yoki Kazu Takia, a Japanese Free Methodist, really, really a great guy. And then Clarence Bass out of Bethel Seminary. All of that together brings me to these things as we're trying to understand. And when we deal with this, you got to remember that we are dealing with it from our side of the issue, not God's side of the issue. We can't get into God's mind and see it all, but we can understand it, but we can only understand some of it from our perspective, trying to work backwards. We can't get into Adam's head and all of that, but we can work kind of backwards and see what the problem is, and see how it relates to us today as well. That we can do, and that was what we need to do here. So when humanity was created in the image of God. That speaks to the spiritual side of humanity. There is a spiritual side of humanity. That spiritual side is what we refer to as a transcendent side, if you will. We can even talk about it in terms of a self-transcendent side of humanity. What do we mean by a self-transcendent side? You are more than an animal. You are not a bear or a cat or a dog or a chicken, or some of you may be chickens or whatever it is. We're not that. We're humanity. The animals were not created in the image and likeness of God, but humanity is. All right? And that's a self-transcendent. There is something on the inside of humanity, if everybody is honest about it, that tells us there's got to be something more to this. So, you know, when you talk about your best life now, that's a crack. Only people who think the best life is now would be those that have nothing to look forward to. One person said, the only ones that can do that, consider their best life now, are those who are destined for hell, can say that because they're not going to anything better than what is now. It's not going to get any better than now. Well, that's wrong. Absolutely, totally false. Our best is yet to come on that. So our self-transcendent side tells us there is more. There is more. There is hope. There is a future. There is a kingdom on that. So that's a self-transcendent side. We know that that's there. But there's also this. And this is where the dialectical tension comes into play. On the other hand, humanity is finite. We are not the creature. We are the created. We are dependent on God. We are here. God is here. We are totally dependent on Him. We can never rise up along beside Him and be equal to. We cannot rise above that and come over on top of Him. We are always here. Why would anybody want to do that in a way? What causes humanity to want to do that? What causes people to want to do that? That's what's wrong in this country right now. And it began in the church world of all places, is people wanting to rise up and take control. I'm going to take control myself. With eyes spinning sideways. So humanity's finite and dependent. We are involved in this lower nature. And boy, there are a lot of critters today involved in the lower nature of worshiping. Paul was right in Romans 1, worshiping the creature and the created rather than the creator. But this finitude, if you will, is not the source of evil itself, and neither is it the source of the fall of humanity. And then on still another hand here, evil, i.e. sin in humanity, is a consequence of humanity's fall. Not a necessary fall. We say a foreseeable fall, possibly. Maybe we could say an inevitable fall. You might even could say that. That's on the edge, I would say. But the fall was not necessary. It did not need to happen, is the issue there. But humanity refused to accept its own finitude, if you will, and admit its insecurity. When we discover that we are finite and we're not God, that could be a little bit insecure. That's where faith comes in, by the way. All these big faith people, they got so much faith they can rise up like this. That's not what faith is for. Faith is to live in a balanced tension. That's what faith is really for, to help us live in a balanced tension. Humanity then finds itself to exist in a contradictory environment, a unique position it is. Between nature, the lower side, and spirit would be the higher side. And to exist that way as a free-willed created being in the image of God, its creator, creates, we'll say, a tension, an intrinsic tension. In another way, we could say it like this. We could say, drawing on the analogy of human existence, we could say that humanity existed in a balanced tension between the now and the then. We still live in that balanced tension between the now and the then. Now it is this. We live in the balanced tension of a now, Jesus already coming and established the premise of that kingdom in our heart. That's the now. The then is the coming of the kingdom literally in an eschatological, teleological conclusion at the end. We live in that balanced tension. That's what faith is for, is to be able to live in that balanced tension. Now all of this actually comes into play in chapter 6, verse 16, 17, 18, 19, in here, it has to do with this. That's why I'm injecting it here. Okay? There's a balanced tension between the now and the then, between the already and the not yet, between freedom and finiteness, between being creature and then the creator God, necessity and freedom, time, eternity, and so forth. And it is only in the Christian faith in Jesus Christ does full justice come to the self. I say that because of this. We hear a lot about social justice, social justice, social justice. It's a wrong term. Denominations have picked that up and hit the bandwagon. That's a wrong thing. There cannot be any of that. The only way that we can have justice, and only in a sense in justice, is never going to be in this world as far as relationship with the world. True justice only comes by surrendering our entire self to the Lord Jesus Christ, and He justifies us, puts us in a new standing. He puts us in, gives us a new status. And then we say that that's justified. He deals with us justly and rightly. Now, this contradictory situation in which humanity finds itself is not and does not in itself lead to temptation, but it may be the right mix of things to cause that to happen. In other words, it is humanity's involvement in interaction with these contradictions, with the already and the not yet, the spiritual side and the natural side. It's our involvement with that back and forth, back and forth. And it's part of this is the problem that Paul's talking about between the tension, the balance, and the struggle in Romans 7 as well. It is very real. This is very part of it. So that balance, trying to live in that balanced tension for which faith comes to us, is given to us. God gives us that faith to do that, by the way. To live in that balanced tension allows for a situation of anxiety and insecurity to take over, anxiety being a key word. So it is humanity's, then we can reason that it's humanity's anxiety and insecurity that when they combine, when we fuss with all those and we think about our future with the Lord, we think about created in the image of God, the spiritual side and the low side. And when we think of the possibilities of freedom, we want to be free. That's one thing, to be free from that. All of that leads humanity to be tempted to sin when we want our own freedom. Adam and Eve wanted their own freedom. Bonhoeffer deals a lot with this in the first part of his book of Ethics, and tremendous things here. Now, let's discuss a little bit the origin of sin in humanity. All of this was scheduled for last Thursday, but you can see we ran out. We're running out of time now, too. A good place in getting at the nature of sin is to look at its origin or the occasion. Let's look at the occasion of sin. Sin is occasioned by, but is not caused by. Now, that's an important difference. Sin is occasioned by, but not caused by, the contradictory elements that we were talking about of being restricted in our finiteness as a created being, and yet being free, if you will, the free or the spiritual side of us in which we exist. There is that dichotomous situation. Long story short, humanity is free as a free person, free will, free person, and it exists in the middle position between nature and spirit. We're in the middle. Nature, the lower, spirit, we are stuck in the middle. So along comes Satan. Comes to humanity in the middle and places before humanity an idea, a opportunity, i.e. a temptation to reject that created status, that created position, to reject that and grab one for himself that he creates himself, to be his own, in charge of his own destiny. I will write my own ticket. I will do it by myself. So that situation, Satan coming to Eve, and Paul said that Eve was deceived, but Adam knew what was cooking. This creates an anxiety and insecurity, as some might say, in humanity about his created position between nature and spirit. Now, in a lot of movements, a lot of hyper-charismatic or Pentecostal movements like this, you'll find it where people want to rise up and, whoom, we're this, and take that all on. That's the situation here. That's the situation. We need to learn to be content and satisfied, as it were, with the way God made us. When I say that, I'm talking about the position in which He put us. We cannot, it's not possible to be in any better position than to be totally reliant on an awesome, powerful, almighty God who created us and sustains us and takes care of us and has an eternal future for us. If we stay right in the chair where He put us, is the issue there. Now, the temptation narrative in Genesis, that dialogue between Satan and Eve, confirms the process I'm talking about. And again, James 1:15 confirms that process as well. When enticed, being drawn out, and then you bite on it, and then you pull the fish in the boat, skin them and clean them and eat them for supper. That's what Satan does with a lot of people. Now, so Eve took the bait and Adam took the bait. Humanity rejected then its created position that God had given it within the created order. And the relationship between humanity and the Creator was vitiated, it was broken. And this initial fall has led to ever increased forms of sins. Worse and worse and worse and worse sins as the ages have gone on. That sort of describes somewhat of the predicament here. Now, let's just talk about freedom just for a few minutes here. I'm just picking things out that have to do with this. The very essence of humanity is rooted in, and it comes out of humanity's freedom. God created humanity free. Humanity rejected that because it depended on God. Humanity rejected that and grabbed it itself, created its own. Again, Bonhoeffer deals very well with that in his first part of his book on ethics. Humanity was created with a free will, is what we're saying here. Freedom is the key to that whole discussion. Sin is not possible without freedom. That's why we're free. Sin is not possible without freedom. Sin is not possible without freedom. God created humanity with freedom, a free will. But this does not mean that freedom necessitates sin. Sin is not possible without freedom, but that does not mean that freedom necessitates sin. It is that humanity sought to escape its finiteness in which humanity was created. It didn't like the position in which God put it, in a subordinate position to God. Reminds me of the words in Jude. He wrote about this too. I remind you of the angels, he said, who did not stay within the limits of the authority of God that He gave them when He created them, but left where they belonged, and so they fell. The fall of humanity is much like the fall of the angels, by the way. The same principle is involved here. They rejected their own original created position and purpose. And so every sin thereafter now is rooted in the rejection of one's created position. That's part of where we wanted to get to. I want to underline that. Catch this. Every sin after the initial sin of Adam and Eve is rooted deeply within the rejection of one's created position. Catch that. Write it down. I want to say it again. Every sin after the initial sin in the Garden of Eden is rooted in one's rejected of one's created position. Stop and ponder that. Stop and think about that. Apply that to everything you see going on in this country, in the political arena, every other arena there is. Think of that. Every sin after Adam and Eve is rooted in the rejection of one's created position. Satan did it, Lucifer, all the created angels did it, and humanity did it as well. Every time a sin is committed, it is a form of rejecting one's created position. Now let's look at the created position just for a second here. This position, the created position, is the position between nature and spirit, finitude and freedom, and immanence and transcendence. I like the last one the best. Immanence and transcendence. Immanence means nearness down here. Just think of it as earthiness in that sense. And transcendent is above. God is transcendent. Okay? Think of it that way. Part of a problem is that people don't understand the difference between immanence and transcendence, and especially the idea of transcendence. Humanity picks up on immanence well, because it's really self-oriented, more directed towards that, but not transcendence. Although humanity likes to transcend, and that's part of the problem, the initial fall to it, to transcend above having to be obedient, is what was happening here. But what can be better than God's original purpose and position for humanity? That's a fair question. What can be better than that? He's the potter, we are the clay. He knows what he has in mind. And for people, humanity, to reject what God has for them, it's just flat out stupid. Really, they've gone stupid, as one person used to say. Don't go stupid on me. I think God told Adam and Eve, now, here you are, but don't go stupid on me. There's a problem if you do. The position between created and creator. Why would somebody object to the purpose for which one was created? Now that statement is loaded, by the way. Why would one reject the position in which God created us, humanity? It's the best position that is ever possible in all of eternity in which to be, is that position in which God created us and how he created us in his image and likeness. How did he create us? Male and female created he them. And a husband and wife will come together and be one flesh. Male and female be one flesh. There are a number of other things besides that, by the way, that come into play. It is God's original purpose and intention when he created. I'm telling you, we as a persons and we as a church, we as a country, we as a world need to get back to God's original intention when he had in mind when he created humanity in his likeness and after his image. All right? So this position of being between spirit and freedom, immanence, transcendence, and whatnot, only becomes an occasion of sin when it is interpreted falsely. And Satan did that in the Garden of Eden. He interpreted that falsely, misquoted it. God have mercy, look on the news, that's all you see. As the devil, he did that. Satan, the accuser of the brethren, he interpreted that being created, that tension between spirit and free, transcendence and immanence, he interpreted it wrongly. Now, just as a side, to get back to my pet peeve, just how really serious is it then when one interprets the Word of God, the Word of truth, falsely, refusing to listen and accept the right way here, opting for not going through the door, but finding a different route in there. So, rejection. If humanity took time to seriously contemplate what it is to exist between nature and spirit, if you will, immanence, transcendence, humanity would not have succumbed to unnecessary tyrants and their tyrannies, to totalitarians and their totalitarianisms, to dictators and their dictatorships, to despots and their despotism, to megalomaniacs and their megalomaniisms, and all the rest that are representations of the evil in this world. What does this mean? Humanity, it refers to the fact that humanity looked, as it looks today, for a way out of its created position. I don't like what I am or the role that God created for me. Humanity was created by divine action and authority. Humanity existed under divine authority. It was created in the image of this divine authority, but humanity is not the divine authority. Being created in the image of divine creator and authority means that somehow humanity has something in common with God, which is freedom, the freedom side. What does Paul say? Don't let freedom be turned into a license. You understand? And that's the essence of it. But God is the only one who is God. We are not God. And so that's what we're talking about. We're talking about that balanced tension between the already. Now, sin then enters the picture when humanity tries to realize who it is. When humanity tries to realize itself without the limits of divine authority. Now, I ask you, do we not see that being played out in this country, all over cities all across this country? Let me repeat it. Sin enters the picture when humanity tries to realize itself without the limits of divine authority. That happens in the church world, it happens in secular world, it happens in any world. Sin then becomes a mysterious offer. Satan presents it as an offer of an alternative way. I got a different way other than God's way. You don't have to worry about it because it's part of you. It's on the inside of you. You just have to bring that which is on the inside of you to life, into full self-realization. It's in you. Just do it. It's in you. The potential is in you. John says, he who refuses to come in at the door is a robber and a thief. Satan did that in Eden, and humanity did that when it tried to get at God without going through the door that God created for it to go into. So this is the scene back in Eden. This brings us into this dilemma with this today. Now, Satan overestimated. Evil always overestimates. Another way to say it is, evil always overplays its hand and steps in a pile of it. Let's put it that way. Evil always does that. Humanity does it too. And that's a pity. We got to learn to let it go. Stay where we are with God. But deep inside on humanity, as Bonhoeffer would say, there's a desire to be reunited with its Creator. There's a gnawing lack on the inside of humanity to be at one again with its Creator. Again, Bonhoeffer deals with this explicitly. First part of his book on ethics. You really need to get it here. Humanity craves for that fellowship and that longs to be with its Creator, like a child with its mother or something. That is. It does not. But humanity doesn't recognize that. It rejects that because to accept it means that there's something bigger than the self and something beyond. We got to recognize that there is a God to whom we answer in all of that. So humanity rejects it. And that's where sin comes in, is rejecting that. So humanity has left its true source, God, and has become its own source, essentially. And that is something that can't exist side by side. It cannot be. And we've run our time out here, and we'll have to do tomorrow night. We'll jump into 17 and 18, the first part of 19, and finish this out. Okay. These I take the time to go through those because they're important. They're important pieces. They're important theological pieces to understand ourselves, to understand what's going on in our lives and whatnot. And that's why I take the time to go through that. I know some of it may seem laborious. I'm aware of that. But this is not a church service, and we don't have to keep a crowd jumping on the back of the pew all the time. This is more of a classroom setting. These are important things for us to know and come to terms with. I would suggest you pull this out and look at it again tomorrow or later on, if you will. All right. So, wrapping this up, Don't you know that you are slaves to whomever it is you present yourselves as slaves, which results in obedience to those whom you obey, whether sin into death or whether obedience into righteousness? You see that? Whether sin to death or obedience to righteousness. There is that tension. That tension. That tension. That tension. That tension. That tension. Again, God is telling us how he is seeing this in chapter 6, telling us how he is seeing this from the standpoint of eternity, the standpoint of being creator. He's telling us what's happening here. It's important to know what's happening, and then we'll go on from there. I gotta stop it here, and we'll pick it up exactly right here tomorrow night at the same time, right around 7 o'clock. Okay. Now our neighbor just brought over some fish that she fried, and boy, I'm telling you what, that's some kind of good, and it's out there, so I'm quitting. I'm gonna go eat some fish and some good coffee and enjoy myself here, but no ice cream. I got to take a diet, and then that's what I got to stop some of that. And anyway, God is with us. This is good. It's been fun. I enjoy this. You have a good night, and let's keep everything in prayer, a whole country in prayer. Let's watch for God. God is working. Let's keep him working. A lot of encouraging things happening, okay? In the Lord. We'll see you tomorrow night. God bless. Have a good night.